Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. Very much appreciated. I know we connected on LinkedIn. I was looking into your new book, Customer Transformation. And one of the things that really sort of hit home for me was, a couple things. Certainly, we'll dive into it in a second, but just what feels like very logical, very human approach to business, which I think sometimes in American business culture, or maybe the Western world business culture, in my experience, tends to be lacking, right? Like I grew up watching those ABC always be closing, Wall Street, all those sort of movies, and I think that business culture in the 80s that was so pronounced. And to your point, I don't believe it works anymore. And I certainly the last couple years on planet Earth has sort of evolved our species a bit here. But before we dive into the nitty gritty, maybe you can just take a quick second to introduce yourself. You work for some incredible companies. I know you run a couple organizations here today, but maybe a little career background, and then what inspired you to write Customer Transformation?
Yeah, well, glad to be here and happy to dive into all of these fabulous topics that you've outlined. So, my name is Chris Hood. I'm a strategist and author, and I spend a lot of my time thinking about business, entrepreneurships, all the way up to enterprises and how they engage with their technology and leverage technology to meet consumer needs, which is ultimately what the book is about. And we'll get into that. I have previously worked for companies like Google and Disney and Fox Broadcasting. So I've spent a lot of time in the media and entertainment space, but across my entire career, it's been a bridge between the technology components and the business components. And I kind of sort of function in the middle of that as a translator, I guess you could say, helping businesses, again, be able to communicate goals and objectives and outcomes to the technology teams, while also helping the technology team communicate very strong technical terminologies into business language so that a company can progress and they can get along with each other and develop these exciting brands that we all engage with on a regular basis. So a lot of really interesting experience, which has all accumulated to writing this book called Customer Transformation. And again, happy to be here.
It's interesting. I was just chatting with someone named Phil Johnson, who I also connected on LinkedIn with, and he was talking a lot about, I guess the best way I could describe what he was describing to me and around his philosophy was like Eckhart Tolle type, sort of Zen or mindfulness sort of applied to like our lives in general. But the way he was describing was applying it to the business context, and I can't help but feel that there's maybe this very human component or approach that I felt when I was talking to him with your philosophy. When I read things like empathy and infusing the emotional layer or an emotional layer within the customer experience, if you were to think about kind of what inspired you to write Customer Transformation, anything that sort of stands out there?
Yeah, well, I started playing around with this concept probably back in 2016. So it's been quite a while where I've gone around in circles on the premise and trying to build out what this framework would look like. And it really started when I started to spend more time with organizations talking about digital transformation. And digital transformation is this term that I'm sure a lot of people have heard. And it focuses on how do you transform the technology at a company in order to meet the needs of consumers. The problem that I was seeing is that there was too much focus on the digital or the technology components of that transformation. And so you could go and do a search today on digital transformation. You will find 500 different interpretations as to what that actually means, as well as pure marketing spin in order to hype up a product which really has nothing to do with digital transformation. But it's it's like AI today.
Mm,
It's a buzzword. It's a hype. It's the thing of of the moment, sort of. Now that moment has been over the course of the last decade, but again, most people really don't understand what the true purpose of digital transformation is, which is to evolve your technology to keep up with the changing demands of consumers. That's what digital transformation is. Anybody out there who wants to argue that point with me, you can come and find me on my website. So, but I wanted to remove the focus of the technology from the equation. And I wanted to put that back on to the consumer, the customer. We are all customers. Everything that we do on a daily basis revolves around some form of interaction with another business. We understand what our own personal goals, needs, satisfactions, desires are. And that context of a customer first into a perspective of an organization needing to transform, you alluded to it. We are evolving at a rapid pace, not just with the technology that we use, but how we engage with others. The pandemic has completely disrupted that. How our social, economical conditions have altered the way we interact with businesses. And in order to understand that, businesses need to refocus their attention on the consumer, that customer, that end user, and be able to transform the entire breadth of the organization in order to meet up with the continuous evolution that consumers are going through.
mm.
And that's the foundation of the book and the framework, which again, I think back in 2016, I saw this clear need to be able to start refocusing that attention, which brings us to today with the book.
Do you think that maybe these, like, Gen Y and these new generations are driving that kind of change, and the needing to adapt to the consumer, or we talked a lot about, like, over the last couple of years, consumerization of the enterprise, and certainly looking at it from a technology perspective, like user interfaces, designs. Specifically, I come from the world of B2B software, so I kind of looked at it from that perspective. But a lot of what they were talking about was, hey, you can't just have the old school, ugly non-user interfaces or non-interfaces, but that was very much like product oriented, right? And so, do you think it's those new generations, or are you seeing this shift in behavior and the adaptation that needs to happen uh, to all audiences of all demographics?
Yeah, there's two primary shifts that we're seeing. Age, we'll just simply refer to it as age, is definitely one huge factor. I'll give you a great example of this. Banking. 10, 15, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, we walked into a bank to do all of our transactions. Today, most banks are going out of business from a brick and mortar perspective. They're closing their branches because we have devices in our hands, and the younger generation are more connected, leveraging those devices. And so all of our financial transactions can actually happen on a mobile device. There is no need to walk into a branch. And you could look at this as a demographic, again, an age demographic. Older individuals who grew up walking into branches, bank branches, are more comfortable with doing that because that's what they grew up with.
Mm.
I have a son. He's going to turn 16 next week. He's never stepped foot into a bank branch, right? So there's a clear perspective of the youth and how the youth engages with technology that is going to drive that transformation. But in a broader sense, technology is also impacting our interpretations or our beliefs or even our mindset as to how do we engage with organizations. So, for example, Amazon has completely changed our mindset in terms of our expectations as to how fast I should be able to get something, right? Either I go to a grocery store and I can buy it myself, or if I want to shop online, I'm going to go to Amazon, buy something, and I believe it's going to show up at my door tomorrow.
Mm,
So if I then go to another business, anything, call it ABC business, and I order something, my expectation is that they'll deliver it by tomorrow.
mm,
And when that doesn't happen, we default and go back to Amazon because we've been trained to believe that it's the next day or heck, even same day service. They've completely altered how we think about transactions. We could look at this with like taxi driving and Uber, right? I think if you go traveling, if you go through the airport, you're going to come out, you're going to have two options. There are still going to be some taxis, but mostly there's going to be Uber. That has changed our mentality in terms of how do we get from point A to B.
mm,
And so technology and then social and economical conditions, et cetera, which are all being influenced by that technology, are shifting our foundational premise in terms of how we interact with businesses. And that's what we have to be aware of. It really doesn't matter what the age and demographic is in the long run.
mm.
It's facilitating what the consumer wants and expects, and then building your tools and systems and software and technology, your corporate business, your models all around that.
Hmm. You used the bank analogy, and that really hit home for me because it was interesting. If I think about the interactions that I've had with the bank over the last my bank over the last 8 months or so, and how frustrated I was with the lack of empathy on the phone and the digital channels. Give you an example, going on and trying to use their chatbot, and their chatbot just not being really set up really well. And I use one of the large old school banks that has grown through M&As over the last probably 40 years and so on. So it's not one of the new ones. And their technology really, again, was not set up properly. I didn't feel like I was being understood, that they were giving me very generic surface level responses. And then I said, all right, let me just abandon this and try to get in touch with someone on the phone, a little more old school, right? And then got on and then got transferred around, plenty of times. I'm sure this is something that a lot of us can really kind of empathize with. And again, didn't feel empathy, didn't feel like I was being understood, didn't feel like there was a lot of care. And after probably 8 different people, I said, gosh, I'm just going to go into the actual bank. Went into the actual bank. And then what was interesting is I was able to sit there with a human being face to face and share that energy. And I felt like they were empathizing, and we were able to get, some problems solved. And I didn't leave the bank after wanting to about 20 times. And it's so interesting because we know that old school model, or the previous paradigm of going in, is inefficient for a lot of ways, but there's that emotional component, that empathy, that human component that I'm just I'm struggling with trying to figure out how we replicate that online. Another example is the remote work stuff that's been really happening at scale since the whole pandemic situation. That's really created a whole, that's a whole another discussion, right? But it's created this really interesting dynamic between employees and employers and managers and etc. And so we, of course, if we think about the customer experience, yeah, like I said, I feel like we still haven't figured that out. So when you think about empathy and infusing that emotional layer, how do we do that within this new digital world?
Yeah, I think the starting point is old school, and it's very basic. It's asking. It's actually sitting down with your customers and finding out what is important to them. And too often businesses want to say, well, yeah, we keep in touch with our consumers. We have surveys that go out and we
Mm,
ask them and we poll them and we use that data to understand them. And yet the questions and the polling that they're asking are the wrong questions, right? We think about
mm,
customers as, well, we have to sell something to them. So what can we sell to them? And are we doing a good job with our experience? Are we doing a good job selling to them? Really is what you're asking. And yet we're not asking, what are the problems that you're having? What are the goals that you have that you need to solve? What is it that you want? What's your aspirations? These critical questions are how we better understand that empathetic view. Because to your point, a chatbot is not going to understand it. And we see this time and time again. You're going on, the chatbot is programmed with like 10 responses to 10 questions. And if it's outside of that realm, it has no idea what to do, in which case we get frustrated and then we give up. And then we either have one of two courses. We decide to call, like you did, or we decide to leave the bank and go find a different bank who's going to
mm,
answer my problems. Our our patience is at an all-time low, and it only takes one problem before we say we're abandoning and going somewhere else. But then when you call and you get the same runaround, because all they're doing is trying to get that answer solved as fast as possible without really caring about the situation, you then have another choice: go to a different bank or continue and go in. Each step, somebody is abandoning, somebody is leaving, and they're going to go to your competitor. They're going to go somewhere else. So it has to all be rooted in understanding the customer, who they are, what they need, what their problems are, what their goals are. And those questions start the empathetic cycle. And you have to be able to then carry that through every other department within your organization. So all the way back to technology, you should be saying, well, we're going to bring in this technology like a chatbot, and it's going to help us improve our cycles. Yeah, but what is it going to give to your consumer? Like, will your chatbot be able to say, you know what? It feels like this person is frustrated. And instead of repeating myself, I'm going to hand them off to a real person.
mm,
Or even better, imagine this scenario. It seems like this customer is having a really bad day. It appears as if they are trying to make a payment for something, or maybe they are late on a bill. You know what? We're not going to go through all this process. We're going to give them an automatic 2-week extension on their bill payment because it just feels like they're having a problem.
mm.
Now, today, only a real human being can help you achieve that. And yet, we're trying to build technology to bring that human element, to impose a level of empathy that does not exist.
Hmm.
And so, all you're really doing is ignoring your customer.
Hmm.
And when you get into that mindset where it's better that your metrics look good and we don't care that we are all of a sudden losing customers, there is the true problem.
And is that like a boy? I just don't think that any leadership team sits at a board meeting and would sit there and say, okay, you know what, it's okay to lose customers, and we're because we don't see that. Like, is that a human problem? Like, why are we not? As we discuss this, it seems so logical. Well, why are we not actually like finding out the answers? Because I could sit here and tell you another 10 stories of customer experiences that I had that were as poor or even worse with a variety of different organizations. But I won't turn this into a therapy session here. But what's the underlining thing that's going on here? Because I just don't think that leadership teams, if they saw the information or had the discussion in the layman terms, in the logical way like we are here, that they would choose obviously to lose customers. And it seems so basic, but we just can't figure this thing out.
And yet it still happens. We can walk through countless examples of this. And I'll give you two, and I think they will be clear as day when we walk through it. So in India, there's a company. This made news. I'm not sure how many people actually saw this, but in India, there's a company, and the CEO decided to lay off 90% of his customer support team and replace them with AI. And the CEO clearly said the AI performs better. They solve tickets faster. They get the correct answer right off the bat. There's no interpretation. There's no miscommunication. And I would argue, yes, but that's a short-term gain, because you're still going to ultimately have people who want to talk with a real human, and eventually they are going to get frustrated. And those individuals who get frustrated are going to start to leave. And then your short-term gain in productivity and automation is ultimately going to drive some consumers away. And then what are you going to do? You're going to have to begin hiring. And maybe now it's, instead of 10% of the original, now it's up to 20, 25, 30. But somewhere in there, there's a balance between human connectivity and AI automation. And yet a CEO made that decision without any consideration as to, will I lose customers? The belief system, I don't know the individual, but I would argue the belief system is probably that they believe they're not going to lose customers because the automation and the support is so much more accurate. Completely negating the human connection that is going to be missing. Another example of leadership not really being aware of what their consumers want is Bud Light. Now, we can dive into Bud Light. I don't believe that this is actually a marketing issue. I don't believe it's a messaging issue. This was a leadership issue. This was leadership that did not ask the right questions, did not even understand who their demographic was, had no empathy towards their existing consumer base, and basically wants to come across as, we didn't know. Well, the fact that you didn't know is the problem. You have to be aware of how decisions are going to impact your business. And in this case, you have a CEO that honestly doesn't care about their customer base, and as a direct result, lost a whole bunch of customers. This was probably a discussion that was happening in the boardroom. And as your question started off with, how are they sitting in a boardroom and making decisions that will let them lose customers? They don't know better? Well, you can't argue that. Look, they've got to know better. It's that they're not asking the right questions, or they're not confirming the data and matching it up back with the original empathetic perspective of, who are our customers? What do they want? What do they need? What are their goals? And so that disconnect between leadership and the very start of the framework, the customer, that's what's missing. And you have to solve that if you're going to be successful.
You know, I think your book is one of the most important, or is featuring or hosting one of the most important discussions that we can be having here. You know, I as I mentioned, have been in B2B for many years, and we all saw what SaaS has experienced the last 2 years with layoffs and these sort of things. And I won't name a name, but I was reading a tweet from a really prominent investor. Runs a VC fund and a hedge fund, a big family office, etc. And I remember the message that this individual was communicating. I understood from a logical perspective from a quantitative perspective what they were trying to communicate. But they said something like the best leaders will always prioritize their P&Ls, essentially. And went on to say a couple other things, encouraging, or sort of, I guess, encouraging a lot of those leadership teams that just cut people without thinking about anything else because their P&Ls justified it, right? Which, again, I get it at a logical perspective or from a logical perspective, but there's so much more to your point. And I just remember scratching my head and going, this individual is probably looked up to by so many people in the business community, and it's literally one-sided. And I can tell you just from my own experience and from just conversations that I've had with a lot of people over the last, let's call it, year and a half, you firing 90% of your people, or just the way that a lot of these, rifts, right, have happened over the last year. And I know this has happened, this has been happening for a long time, but again, it's this culture which is like, we got to prioritize P&Ls, and we're just cutting fat, and then we're leaving. They tend to forget, and it baffles me, like all the people who ended up staying at the organization, right, had this survivor guilt, right? And I just talked to countless people that had it, customers that were going, holy crap, what is going on within that organization? And nowadays, with social media, employees get on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc., and talk, about their experience, and it negatively affects so much of the organization. In fact, I'm thinking of one organization that I know for a fact that I'm really, concerned with whether they can stick around because of these very specific decisions. So again, it's this very quantitative thing, the sort of the culture that I kept talking about. No one was talking about empathy. No one was talking about how do we do this in a way that actually like is more human, right? And is not just based on a P&L or projections. We all understand that, the market's been sideways, but we have to, as leaders, as organizations, just do better.
Well, I will say this. The best leaders do not focus on P&L. And I'm going to give you a very logical explanation for this. The best leaders focus on their customers. Why? Because without customers, you do not have a business. Period. Your P&L, your profits are based on customers. So if you satisfy customers' needs, expectations, aspirations, goals, then you make money. That's your profit. Your loss, yeah, you can look at, and there's lots of ways that you can cut cost and rethink about this. But if you are delivering to meet your consumers' needs, you won't have to worry about the losses. You're making money. And these are the strategies of companies like Amazon. Focus on the customer. The profits will come. Companies like, Starbucks, make a quality product, focus on the customer experience, the profits will come. You may eventually have to make some tough decisions, mostly because of, again, social economical conditions where the economy is skyrocketing, and you've got to figure out, how to cut some cost here and there. And maybe cutting those costs is going to, be headcount. Maybe it can be other things. Again, most people are overreaching in their technology expenses, which, that's also because they're not aligning their technology expenses back to what the customer wants. But if you think about this, the best leaders have to continuously not just think about their customer, but obsess over their customer. And then the companies that don't, Bud Light, Disney currently, like Target has seen a massive loss because they're trying to alienate some of their customer base. Like those companies who don't obsess over their customers are losing money. So, leadership, best leaders, focus on your customer.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. Let's dive in a little to into the, seven stages, that seven stage strategy of achieving customer alignment. And if you were to think about kind of some high levels of that framework, what are some of the takeaways that folks can have from it?
Yeah, let's walk through the 7 steps, the 7 stages of customer transformation, and I'll try to make these very quick so that we can, dive into any one you want. The first is customer. That's your starting point. Customer first. Everything we've been talking about aims to who the customer is, what are their goals, what do they need. Stage 2 is all about interfaces. Now, interfaces is how does the customer interface with you? And there's any number of ways that they can do that. We used to call this touch points, but you pick up your phone, that's an interface. Your mobile phone is an interface. You touch it, you use an app, but we're no longer touching things. We have voice controls, we have smart devices, we have virtual reality and visual elements, AR. Heck, there's a scientist in Japan that's creating a taste TV where you can lick the screen and actually taste something, right? So, so multi-sensory types of explorations are these interfaces. How do we interface with the business? Number 3 is the journey. It's the actual customer journey. How do they engage with you? What is the experience? Number 4 is ecosystem. This is the community that you build. It's also where you build partnerships, where you collaborate with other organizations to drive unique experiences. We talked about Uber. Imagine if your airport, your airline, Uber, and your hotel were all connected together in a seamless experience. That's an ecosystem. The next one is culture. And culture is about your employees, your teams, your internal culture. The entire organization needs to have a customer first perspective, not just your marketing team, not just your product and services team, not just your customer experience team. Every team should be rooted in what does the customer want. And then after customer, we hit technology. So all the way up until stage 6, do we reach technology? And then this is all about how do we build the technologies that deliver on what the customer wants. This is not, hey, there's a cool new technology out there. I want to bring it in and play with it. You have to be able to answer the basic question, what is the consumer or customer value proposition for this technology? If you can't answer that, then there's no need for you to bring it in. And then the last one is the actual business. This is leadership. This is value assessment. This is where we actually learn to align our values with the consumer values. It's the bridging of the gap between the customer and the business. This is where we generate our money, where we manage our profits and losses if we want to. But all the way at the end is the business value and alignment with leadership. And that's the 7 stages.
And how do we start to infuse this type of framework? So, to your point, it's not just about marketing, because I think a marketing is constantly coming up with, new ideas, messaging, campaigns, etc. So there's a lot of movement there. So I think probably sort of by default, there's, a lot of movement and a lot of different perspectives and those sort of things. And maybe I don't know, maybe a willingness to adapt or change, but like at you know the organizational level, how do you get everyone aligned around this core message and this mission? Because frankly, like, it's logical, but again, like, it seems to just fall through.
Yeah. Well, the good news is I wrote a book on it. So you could go read the book and it maps out the entire process for you. But there's really only 2 ways that this can happen, either top down or bottom up. Now, top down, you have to get your leadership to participate and recognize that this is an issue. And oftentimes you have a lot of leaders who don't see the issue. They don't recognize it as being an issue. or they believe they're like, oh yeah, we're already doing that, but they're not, right? Like, again, I'll go back to Bud Light. I would argue that Bud Light fully believes that they have this mission to recognize the customer, but obviously they don't, right? So top down or bottom up, it's grassroots. Like, get your team starting to engage in this type of philosophy. Um, Buy the book. In the book I have action items for every single stage to help you have meetings, to help you ask the right types of questions, to bring people along with you for your own internal transformation on the journey. So there's a book, there's action plans. You can go from bottom up, you can go from top down, but ultimately it requires a recognition that your customer is the most valued asset within your organization. And you have to figure out how to enable the entire organization to think in that mindset. And it's hard. It's definitely hard, because you'll still have people who are like, well, we're good with this, we don't need to do this. Or the other challenge is, you'll have teams that are clearly customer focused and then other teams that are not. So for example, marketing tends to be customer focused where technology tends to
Hmm.
not. HR, as an example, human resources, tends to be an internal organization. And rarely do they think about the impact of the customer based on who they are hiring. And yet, that is a critical component of the culture. So you have to break down some of these silos and get people who are typically aimed at an internal job description to also be consumer
Hmm.
focused. And once you start to do that, then I think the floodgates open, you start to see success, and then you can fully embrace the concepts that I've outlined.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being on the show today. If folks wanted to buy the book, maybe we'll start off with that, or connect with you. I know you have chrishood.com and a variety of other channels, but what would be the best ways to pick up the book and then maybe consult with you about how they can really apply this?
Yep. The best way is on my website, chrishood.com, CHRISHOOD. Go there and you can buy a copy of my book. I'll even sign it for you if you would like. You can also buy it on Amazon or your favorite book platforms. You can also find me a way to connect with me on my website, all my social media profiles, my own podcast where we talk more about this. Everything is right there. So it's an easy way. Just go to my website and you'll get what you need.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being on the show today and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much.